My guests today on Creative Inspired Happy are three massively popular creators in the book space on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Bindery. Jaysen Headley, perhaps better known as Easy Cat, Zoranne Host, and Mari Alvarez. Today we talk about how they discover books and how they choose which books they promote online, weathering the changes that platforms like TikTok and others are undergoing, what it's like being a full-time or part-time creator, Bindery, a new way beyond traditional publishing and self-publishing for writers to connect with creators and publish books, and so much more. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast about incredibly successful writers and others in the book world, and how they rose out of obscurity to build fulfilling careers, hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. To join our community and get more writing advice, creativity challenges, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more, follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. I'm so excited to have you here because you are all really influential book creators. You're out there spreading the love of stories, and it is such an honor to have you here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So obviously, there's a lot of upheaval going on right now with TikTok maybe being here, TikTok not being here. So I do want to spend some time today talking about platforms and discovery of books and how you're dealing with, not knowing necessarily where to find audiences in, the coming year, but also just in general, like how you find books that you love, how you work with writers. And then near the end, we're going to talk about Bindery, which is a really cool platform that you all work with to help authors promote their books in a really new, innovative way, I feel, than the old traditional publishing models and self-publishing. So what I want to do, though, is I want to kick it off by asking you one of our questions from our community members, because Creative Inspired Happy is not just a video podcast. We're also a community of writers online. And I love asking them ahead of time, what do you want to know from our guests? And I have to tell you, everyone was so excited for you three to be on. So the first question is from Tara P. And she wants to know, when did you first feel that you were doing something important versus speaking to a void? And I think that really shows you how much we as writers value you as creators, because it used to just be that we relied only on our publicity teams in publishing, and now we have all of you. So, Zoranne, do you want to go first?
Sure. Oh my God, that is a really good question. And I don't think I've ever been asked that, actually. I feel like people usually start with how did you get started with content creation? And I have a really boring answer for that. But I think, honestly, when I realized I was doing something important, it was probably the first few personal messages I got via DM, whether it was on TikTok or Instagram, where it was someone was like, hey, I read this book because of you and I really loved it. Or I just read this, or you recommended, I don't know, The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. Maybe it was that book, maybe it wasn't. But it was the first book I had read since high school, and I'm in my 40s now. Thank you for getting me back into reading. This is just so fun. I feel like I'm having some kind of renaissance. And I realized oh my God, a video doesn't have to go viral to be important or influential or have impact on an individual. And that was just a really cool moment where I was just oh my gosh, my book recommendations and my energy is actually reaching people. And that's just really special to me. And that's one of the reasons I feel like I can continue to create content after 4 years now.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really, you really are making a difference, and I've heard that so much about through COVID, when people had time and they rediscovered books, and what you all are doing, everyone's in a different space here, the books that you like to read and that you like to promote, they're actually really different. And one of the things I hear about sometimes, a complaint that people who aren't familiar with BookTok or these other platforms, is they think that it's only the same books that are being promoted over and over again. But I don't think that's actually true. So Mari, I'm going to throw it to you, the same kind of question. When did you know when what you were doing was important? Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you don't think it's important at all.
I do think it's important, and not specifically to my content, but I will say I'm an elder millennial, so I'm going to throw it all the way back to the beginning of my content was blogs. So I had a blog, and we were still talking about books on that blog, and I think that if I mean it was just a couple hundred people maybe reading it at that point, so it wasn't really about reach, but it was like the realization that we had made a community and that there was like a shorthand that we were all using. There was a language that we were all using, and people talked about, oh, I checked your blog today for your daily post, and so that was part of their day as well. And I became really close with the women that I was running that blog with, and we formed a friendship. So it was all of these like real, like tangible sort of connections that I was making that I was like, oh, there is a community aspect here as well, in addition to the content that I'm creating, and that's, I think, really important.
Yeah. And Jaysen, I'm going to ask you kind of the same question, but with some variations based on what Mari and Zoranne have just said. So maybe why did you get started and how do you keep going? And I think that was actually the second part of Tara P's question that she asked, which was like, what are the metrics of success? Because y'all have been doing this for quite some time now.
Yeah, I mean, I will answer that question with sort of an answer to the original question, which is that I started back in 2020. I started with TikTok was my first platform where I was really doing making content about books, and at the time, I really was speaking to a void. Like it was me by myself with my bookshelf and a camera, just talking and posting stuff online. And obviously, I could see the following growing. I could see people watching, but it still was just me alone in my room with a camera. So a little while after that, I had made some friends. Zoranne was one of them, and there were five of us that we'd never met each other in person, and we all decided to fly to LA, stay in an Airbnb together. We'd never met each other, and go to. We went to Y'all West, which is a book, like a young adult book festival, together. And it was the first time I'd ever gone to like a book event, because this was after COVID, so I hadn't really been going out at all. It was the first time I'd ever gone to a book event in the midst of this like growing platform and this growing audience. And the amount of people that came up to say how much they enjoyed, the book recs that I was giving, the content I was making, the just people that I felt like knew my content better than I did. They'd be like, remember that video you did? And it would be from like months ago. And I'm like, no, I do not remember that video I did, but I'm glad you do. And that was like the moment that I realized it was really something special. And that continues to kind of be the thing that keeps me going, is the community aspect of all of this is hands down by far the best part. I have met some of my best friends in the world at this point from being in this community and creating content with people. I've been able to form connections with just incredible humans. And I love that I am able to connect with people all over the world just talking about books. Like, I think that's just the coolest thing in the world. So, yeah.
So as a follow-up to that, Jaysen, how do you choose which books to, I don't want to even say promote, but to like share the love of?
I don't even know anymore. I go down rabbit holes of like wanting to read through like a whole series of something, or I'll note it. Like there'll be a new, okay, so recently, for example, I kept seeing clips of Exo Kitty, that show on Netflix. And I kept seeing clips of that. And I was like, well, I want to watch this. But then I realized that it was a spin-off of movies that were based on books. So I was like, well, I have to read the books first. And so a lot of times that's what happens. But also, like, I'm really committed to sharing and promoting diverse authors. So I'm always, searching and hunting for, new voices and new stories and things like that. Because what I really try not to do with my platform is go back to the same old, right? Like the five books of Book Talk, the books that everybody talks about. I really want constantly on my page for people to be not just seeing books they are already familiar with, but books that they've maybe never heard of, authors they've never heard of, so that they have the ability to discover those authors. And I think I think I do a nice mix of things that people are really familiar with to kind of bring people in, and then things that people have never heard of before. And so I try to kind of keep a running rotation of all of that.
Fantastic. And then Mari, I wanted to ask you, like, so how do you discover books? Because it sounds like, Jaysen, what you're saying, a lot of it is word of mouth, seeing other things maybe online as well, or from your friends. And Mari, how do you discover books? Like, are the publishers involved at any point?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, it is like through being online and social media and hearing what other people are talking about. I very often, I mean, not very often, every once in a while, I will get this like feeling of like, remember walking into a bookstore and just picking up a book and not knowing anything about it? Because that experience is so far from how I discover books now. Whereas, like, years back, I would just like go, oh, this looks good, and have nobody had talked to me about that book and I had to discover it on my own. Now I go to a bookstore and I'm like, oh, I heard Jaysen talk about this and Zoranne talk about this. So there's like a lot of information sort of in your head now when you're just looking for books. So sometimes I like to go and just pick something and like not know what I'm getting myself into. But for the most part, it really is, my trusted reviewers, the content creators that I watch that I know our tastes are similar, or if they hate it, I'll love it. And so, I start collecting all of those things, and that's how I curate my reading these days.
Okay, that's really neat. Zoran, I have a question for you because I know that you're a tastemaker in the science fiction and
Hmm.
fantasy space. So, if you recommend a book, it will just fly off shelves. And one thing I've heard from authors of fantasy is that some of the traditional methods that they used to have of getting the word out there about their books have just disappeared, and they don't know how to find fantasy readers themselves anymore. And so my question on their behalf is how do they reach out to you, or like how do you all work with the authors, because there's kind of a we love you and we're like desperate for your love, and there's just so many great books out there. How do you find them?
Okay, so I feel like over the course of creating content online and reading fantasy for so long, I feel like I've gotten to the point my For You page has gotten to the point where like I've really fine-tuned my taste. So if I pick up a book, I have really good chances of enjoying it a lot and knowing that I once I finish it that I can recommend it to my audience. Just because I mean, as we kind of talked about earlier, that it's like people say that Book Talk recommends the same 5 books over and over, and it's just those 5 books and all the way down in a vacuum. And that's just totally not true, because like my for you page does not look like that, and I'm sure Jaysen and Mari's for you page does not look like that either. I'm sure they're getting a million different books every single day. So I kind of have like a few things that I really love in books. Like I love reading all kinds of fantasy books, but there's like a few things that if I hear like that buzzword, it's gonna like make a bell go off in my head. I'm like, oh my God, this book has dragons. Like I'm there, I'm at the bookstore, I'm purchasing it, I'm in line, I'm taking it home with me. Or if there's like the found family aspect, that's something I really love too. Um, so I feel like yeah, just over the course of years, I've just really fine tuned my tastes. And once I find the book that I really click with, and I read it, I'll just never shut up about it. And I like to make it everyone's problem and everyone's mission to also read it too. So I feel like that's how I've gotten there, of like helping authors like with success is just shoving their books down people's throats.
So it sounds like what all of you are saying is that it's really an organic discovery process, and that what you're recommending, it's not because a publisher has sent you a fancy package. It's because you genuinely you know what you like. You're a reader just like all the rest of us, and you know what
Yeah.
you want, and when you hear about it or you see it, that's how you choose it. And I think that kind
Mm-hmm.
of gets me to the heart of two questions from Petra and Sophia in our community, because they wanted to know how you work with authors. But if you're not working with them directly, like if you don't really want us to come and pitch you and say like, hey, here's my book, please promote it, because you're inundated by those requests, I'm sure. Do you look at other author accounts? Like, how should authors just kind of be part of the reading community as well? Is that how they kind of enter the stream of discovery? Oh, sorry, I'm
I
supposed to
think
choose
it's
someone.
uh,
Mari.
I think it is a difficult thing to answer, and like the answer is not very satisfying for authors in terms of like when you're talking about things that are organic, right? And we're saying, well, it's kind of organic, and when it is organic, it's best because our audiences also know when it's like a paid advertisement versus like I really just picked this up and I loved it, and there's a difference between that kind of content, and so that's really difficult as an author to hear because you're looking for things that you can do in order to like promote your book or to get it in front of the correct people. So I think that we I do work with publishers occasionally, and that is one avenue where they are putting books in front of us or describing books or packages or whatnot. I also do have indie authors reach out to me, but you already talked about like the volume of those things can get a little out of hand. And so I always really appreciate when it is somebody who has reached out and has taken time to understand who I am, to personalize the email, to understand the pitch and say, I'm pitching this to you because you like XYZ and my book has this. Like that kind of personalized pitch really works. I can't tell you how many times I get emails. It's like, hello, my name is Marines, which is my handle. I really love your content, like very generic. And it's like, because there is so much that we're like going through at times, it's like really difficult to really understand what is for us and what isn't. So I think that little extra time of personalizing and understanding who you're pitching to. Don't just find the person with the biggest account and say, okay, that person. No, like understand you want your book to get into the hands of somebody who is going to love it. And maybe that is someone who has a smaller account. But those 1,000 people that they're talking to, they are in community in a way that they will sell it to 999 of those people. And so you always have to really understand who you're pitching to, what that pitch looks like to really grab attention, and spread the love between smaller accounts on different platforms, so that you're really covering a good spread of audience.
Oh, thank you. That's actually super helpful. And I think it clarifies things a lot for us writers who we just want you to know about our books. And people are not really familiar with the volume of inquiries you're getting and, the flood of books. I know that actually a lot of creators are saying, please don't send physical arcs anymore because I just don't have the space for them. And because of that, publishers are saying, we're just not going to print the physical arcs because no one wants them. So Zoranne mentioned the For You page on TikTok. Jaysen, this question's for you. I know that you got your start on TikTok. I think when I was on TikTok, which I no longer am, you were one of the first accounts that I followed because my friend Sarah Rash had also joined TikTok, and she said you have to follow Easy Cat. He's the best. So with the unpredictability of platforms, not just TikTok and what's going on, with that law and everything, but also the fact that all of these major platforms, we are subject to their algorithms. You don't know who's seeing your content. How do you handle that? How do you continue to connect with your audience? Do you have backup plans? Are you on multiple platforms? How does that aspect of your career look? So, Jaysen.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks, Sarah. I love you. I love Sarah so much. So I am we first heard about this let's ban TikTok plan. I mean, 2, 3, 4. I feel like the first time we had this discussion was back in 2020. So since then, I've really diversified my platforms. TikTok is still my largest platform, but I also have a pretty big following on Instagram, YouTube. I post pretty regularly on Threads and Blue Sky, and I'm always open to trying new social media if it seems like a place where people are starting to go and build community. I have a Discord, things like that. I am a big believer in diversifying your platforms and going to these different places. Now, I think there's this really big concern for a lot of people where they feel like, well, I have to create different content for every platform because I don't want people to see the same content over and over again. What they don't realize is that the Venn diagram of people who use all the platforms is actually pretty spread out. I remember the first time there was a series I was doing on TikTok, and I want to say 3 or 4 months into that series of videos I was doing, and I posted one of them on Instagram, and all the comments were people who had never seen it before. It was a brand new thing. Oh, I hope you continue doing this. I can't wait till you do the next one. And meanwhile, I'd been doing it for months, right? And that was such a light bulb moment to me. Oh, this is a totally different audience. Now, what that means is that when I get up in the morning and I'm creating that one piece of content that's going to be my main piece of content for the day, I'm creating it with that in mind, that it is going to be posted to all of my video platforms, that one piece of content, which means less work, right? You're doing all of that work on that one video, you're posting it in multiple places. It also does mean, though, that sometimes there are going to be platforms where your content just naturally works better than others. My content naturally does better on Instagram and TikTok and does pretty terribly on YouTube. But that's okay because I'm still posting it there. I'm still slowly building a community there. And you're gonna find those things that work in certain places and don't work in others. But really diversifying your platform so that you can pivot if you need to is more important now than it has ever been. But the good news is it doesn't require as much extra work as I think sometimes people think it will. It requires extra work, but not to the level of like creating whole different content for multiple platforms, just in the aspect of like managing those different communities.
No, that's really interesting because I really did think that you had to make completely different content just because every platform has different personalities. And I was under that misconception that that Venn diagram was just one big circle, that everyone's
No, not at
following you
all.
everywhere. I mean, that's great news for anyone out there who's making content. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I will just add, even YouTube. Like, obviously, YouTube, you have the opportunity to make much longer form content, but you can be successful on YouTube now just making short content if you want to. So that is also an option for people if they look at YouTube and they're like, I can't make 30, 40-minute videos. You don't have to. You can just use your short content there, and that will work as well.
oh, that's so interesting. Okay, I'm actually really curious. Are all three of you full-time creators at this point?
I am.
Okay, and Zoran is, and then Mari is
I,
not.
yeah.
No, you have an objection, Zoran?
No, I guess I say I'm full time, but I still have a part time job at night. So by day, yes. By night, I'm off the clock.
Like
Okay, well,
Batman.
I'm curious, what does a typical day look like for you, Zoran? If when during the daytime when you're filming content, like do you map out content ahead of time for an entire month? Are you kind of like, hey, today this is what I'm going to do. I came up with this idea this morning. What does that look like?
Oh my gosh, if I could plan my content out a month at a time, I would be a superhero. So I fly more by the seat of my pants. I like to I wake up in the morning and then I kind of I sit down at my desk and I kind of go through my planner of like what I decide I want to do today, and I have like a rough running list of video ideas of like, oh, I think this will work today, and then I can film this YouTube video then, and then I have to take the time to edit that. So I kind of take it on like a day by day kind of case. And I usually try to film 1 or 2 videos a day. And if I don't, sometimes I don't, it's not the end of the world. The world keeps spinning. And I learned to live with that a while ago. But no, it's like, yeah, I try to film like a few videos a day before I have to go to work at night because I do still have a part-time job. But it's making sure that I give myself enough time to do all of those things before I have to get ready and leave my house for my job at night.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mari, what about you? Since you're balancing, like you're not full-time creator, like do you have to plan more ahead of time what you're doing?
I think that my answer is also like maybe not helpful if someone's thinking about doing this full time. But I think the reason that I've been able to do it since, 2010, 2009 or whatnot, I've been making content for a really long time. And the reason that I've been able to make it is because I've always given myself permission to make it when I feel like it and to post when I feel like it. And it has never been a full time thing for me. It has always been like, I feel I want to do this and I continue to do it. And so, it's been over a decade and I still keep wanting to make content because I'm not putting that pressure on myself. I do keep a list of ideas and I get ideas all the time. So I just kind of have to brain dump them sometimes and be like this. And then I do keep a calendar where I can like say, okay, this is a TikTok. This is a full length YouTube video. Do I stick to that calendar? Not always, because again, I'm very loosey goosey with my schedule because it's not my full-time job. But it does help me sort of visualize where all of my ideas are and where I can make the content. And then the same thing with reading in terms of like how I find my books and how I create my content. First and foremost, I have to feel like doing it. I have to want to do it, right? There has to be that passion there or else I will burn out very, very quickly.
I think that's actually great. And there's a parallel to writers as well. There's a lot of people who want to be full-time writers, and I am, and I love it. But I do also think that there is a pressure on your creativity if you do that to yourself. And it's not easy to make a living as a writer. It's not easy to make a living as a creator. And I personally recommend to a lot of people, like, keep your day job, and then you can keep this thing that you started out because you really loved it and continue to love it. However, Jaysen, you are full time. You have this big entertaining personality. So I want to know, how do you balance entertainment with, I don't know, critical reviews, or like, you also have partnerships, paid partnerships. How do you make those decisions so that you can have this full time career, but still also show up as like your authentic self and feel like you're not, selling out, or that your audience still believes that what you're promoting is truly something that you genuinely believe in?
Yeah, I mean, I do use this has changed pretty dramatically in the last 6 months, but I now use a calendar on my fridge, and I keep track of every single day, every single video, what needs to be filmed, what day, when those things need to go live, and that has made a world of difference just in my mental health of just like knowing like this is when this goes up, this is when that goes up, this is what I need to do today. Like that has helped a lot. I think, it is a balancing act. I do a lot of paid promotions with different companies, but I also would say that I still say like 95% of the content that is on my page in a given month is not paid for, right? Like it's just me talking about the things I love. And I think that I like to think that my audience understands that they see when I go on this crazy ride of like, I'm going to watch the To All the Boys I've Ever Loved, or I'm going to watch this whole series. I'm going to read this whole thing. I'm going to, they see that and they know that's not paid content. And I think what also helps is like being very transparent about what is paid and what's not. Like when I'm doing a paid promotion, it is very visually labeled so that they know that that's a paid promotion. And I still bring, the same excitement that I do to those as I do to the normal content that I do, but I make it very transparent so that my audience doesn't have to guess, like, is this a promotion? Is this not a promotion? Like, I think making sure that transparency is there helps build that trust with my community as well. And I do a pretty good job of not, I'm in the fortunate position that I get to be very choosy about what I choose to promote and what I don't choose to promote, right? Like I get to be very selective of what I say yes to and what I say no to. The only hard thing about that is I'm very bad at saying no to anyone. So that's kind of a lesson I've had to learn. But I try to really only promote things that I really truly love and that I'm really excited about, so that I don't ever have to like fake the excitement. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And that authenticity comes through from, the videos that I've watched of yours. Speaking of choosing things that you believe in, I want to talk a little bit about Bindery, because Bindery is, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, a new kind of way of publishing. It pairs writers with creators like you. So, big picture, in the past, it used to be just quote unquote traditional publishing, where you had the big publishers and they were the gatekeepers who would find the books, and then the authors are beholden to them. I mean, I'm in traditional publishing, so I don't want to be very negative about it, because I've loved the system, but it's not for everyone. And it's a kind of a narrow funnel. If you get in, great, but if you don't, you used to be left out in the cold. And then came Amazon, and self-publishing became easy. It lowered the gates so that more people could get in. But sometimes it's really hard to promote that book or let people know that it exists in this like massive sea of books. And then now we have Bindery. So Mari, you volunteered before our show to be the one to describe what Bindery is. So spotlight is on you.
Okay, here we go. So Bindery is actually made up of two different branches. One side of it is kind of like a membership model, like Patreon or YouTube memberships, where creators like us can join the platform, and our communities can find us there. They can either follow us for free or sign up for a membership for different tiers. And so this is another way for us to also create those niche communities. So regardless of what happens to TikTok or, whatever else is happening on platforms or with algorithms, our audiences know they can find us on our Bindery, and all of our content lives there, as well as special and bonus content. Now, some communities grow enough that then they can be converted into imprints. So there are these little, mini publishing arms where the content creator, which we call them tastemakers, they're at the head of this imprint, and they get to do the work of what you would expect from like an acquiring editor. So they go through the manuscripts, they pick the manuscript that they want to publish for the upcoming season. And so we've all had the opportunity to go through that process to pick our manuscripts and see them through the publishing process. Now, Bindery is the publisher, so they've got the full actual like professional team going through edits, marketing, promoting. And so it is very much a partnership with Bindery, doing what you would expect from a traditional publisher, but you have the bonus of having the tastemaker be the champion for the book. And so we had talked previously, like, how do you get that organic sort of partnership between an author and a content creator and really have it feel organic? And Bindery said, you know, the answer to that question is you let the content creator pick the book. You let them be the champion for the book and say, this is the one I love. And so they're taking that book through the process and then also promoting it alongside the author, which really creates a really natural partnership between the two and allows the content creator to also benefit, you know, to this is helping, you know, it also allows the content creator to have some benefit from it as well, because a lot of the work that we do is not paid, is not, you know, we're doing it for the love of the game and as a hobby or whatnot. But this allows an opportunity for that to also benefit the creator. So it's a really neat model, I think, if I do say so myself. And that answers a lot of the questions that we've been getting at throughout this conversation as well.
Yeah, I love that. I really do think it's such a new, like, exciting development. And so let me walk through it from like a writer's point of view. So let's
Mhm.
say that writer Jane has a manuscript that she's been working really hard on and loves it, and she's looking at these different options. She could submit to traditional publishers, she could self-publish, but then she could also submit this manuscript to Bindery. Is that how it works? And then it goes into like their, you know, in traditional publishing they'd call it a slush pile, but like, you know, like let's say there's submissions, and then you as creators who are working with Bindery, you each have your own imprint. And so for those who are watching or listening who don't know what imprints are, even at the big traditional publishing houses, you might have like a Penguin Random House, but then they'll have what I like to call divisions, and each division has its taste for what kind of books they publish. So like at Penguin Random House, Del Rey does science fiction and fantasy, and then you know, like at Simon and Schuster, Atria does kind of like general fiction or book club fiction. And so that's kind of what an imprint is. And so you all now have your own imprints there, and then you go through these submissions of these manuscripts and you think, oh, you know, this is for me. It's kind of like Zoranne was saying earlier, I really like, you know, found family. Like if there's like a fantasy, it's got found family, then Zoranne's going to be like, maybe that one's for me. You sift through, decide which ones you want to champion. And then when you pick it, that book will be published by Bindery and go through the editing process with Bindery. And then you help with the marketing side. And then Mari, I think you were saying that, you know, like this is also a way to kind of support you as a creator. And so it's kind of like, I think of it, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you're like a freelance publicity or marketing person for this book. And so you are compensated with a percentage, I think maybe of the book sales. But in that way, your incentives are fully aligned because you truly love this book. You picked it from the submissions and you'll see it through the end. And that's kind of how people get published. Yes, it seems like I'm getting some nods. Okay, so I would
Yeah.
love to hear about each of your imprints then, and maybe some of the books that you're championing. So Zoranne, since we were talking about you and science fiction and fantasy, tell me about your imprint.
Yeah, so my imprint's name is Fantasy and Friends. Friends is spelled Frens, so no I, no D. Um, and just I don't know, that's how I decided to name my community. Like, oh my God, almost it's 3 years old now. Holy wow. So Fantasy and Friend, the name came from the book club that I have, that I've hosted for over 3 years, just because I wanted a place where community could build. And then that book club quickly blew up and it turned into a Discord server of the same name. And that continues to grow today. And so then when Matt from Bindery reached out, he's the president, CEO, and we talked about this concept, this model of Bindery, I was like, yeah, when it wasn't even built yet, he was like, yeah, keep me in the loop. Let's see where this goes. Cause I was interested in the concept of creating like a subscriber community, much like Patreon, but the book aspect and the publishing aspect of Bindery really intrigued me too. And so when I was able to create a imprint through Bindery, I was like, Fantasy and Friends felt like the most natural name. And because I knew I would want to publish books under the speculative fiction, fantasy, sci-fi umbrella. And so that's kind of like how we got there. So the name really carried itself through from the beginning of like when I started creating content.
And have you picked manuscripts? Do you have a book that's coming
Yes.
out?
Yes, I have one published, one that is currently available, and I have one that's coming out in June 2025. The first one came out in October alongside Jaysen's book that I'm sure he'll talk about too. It's called And the Sky Bled, and it is like a sci-fi fantasy climate fiction. It's a standalone, and it takes place in a world where there's this really scarce fossil fuel that kind of like powers the world. Is called Calor, and it can only be found on this like one island, and of course that island is under colonizer rule. And so this fossil fuel called Calor is really depleted, and there's rumors there that this fossil fuel is there's like a hidden cache of it left on the island, and so people want to find it. And so there's a thief, a slumlord, and an heiress who all want to find it to save their island, but also for their own personal gains and motivations. And the story kind of takes off from there, all while like the world is literally ending. And in the sky, the title And the Sky Bled also happens, like the sky literally rains blood, and that's where they extract this fossil fuel from. I probably should have said that at the beginning, but no. So that's like, it's a really fun novel. It's really dark and harrowing, and it's a kind of a take on like extractive like capitalism and oppression and like climate change, and how that like literally shapes the world as we know it kind of quicker than we originally thought it would. But it's really, really good, and I really loved it. And one of my favorite parts about the publishing process is developing the relationship with the author, S. Hati, and now her and I have become really great friends, and now my community loves her, and it's just a really cool part of the process. And then the second book is called Crueler Mercies, and it's a complete 180 from And the Sky Bled. This is a sapphic revenge fantasy that's coming out on June. Our book's coming out on June 3rd or June 6th, Jaysen? The 3rd? The 3rd. Okay, whatever the first Tuesday is. And so that one follows Princess Vita. In the first chapter, we follow her at 9 years old, and she witnesses her father, the king, murder her mother in cold blood. And that's just like really shocking to Vita. And her father sends his daughter Vita to exile, where she's literally locked in a tower for the next 11, 12 years. Very Rapunzel style, where Vita is nothing but like her birds and her books. And she's literally in this chamber by herself until one day an enemy general comes to the town to take the city. And he's like, listen, girl, I can get you out of here, but you got to marry me, and so I can have your throne. Like, those are the conditions, or like you can be unalived. So pick and choose. She's like, I'd like to live, please. And from there, Vita meets an esteemed lady in waiting named Solene. And both of these girls want revenge. But they also might fall in love on the way. Who's to say? You'll have to read and find out.
Okay, but what I love about this, it's such a great example of how the books that you choose are so truly you and your taste, even though, like you said, they're 180, right? But your readers, your community that has been following you, they know that when you pick a book, like they already love the books that you've recommended, and so, oh, hello, Kitty. But they, that they know that this will be another Zoranne book that they will love. I do have a question. Where do readers find these books that are published by Bindery? Where could they buy them?
They can buy them in store.
Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, they can be found in store via ebook, on audiobook. So like all of our books so far, audio rights have been sold. So And the Sky Bled is on Audible. Crueler Mercies will also be on Audible, and that's just like kind of how like the rights sold. But paperback, trade paperbacks will be sold in stores. So like you could go to your local Barnes and Noble and you can find Bindery titles there.
Okay, that's really exciting, because that was really something I had in my head, wondering like, are you limited to just like Amazon, like just the Bindery website? But apparently not. That's fantastic. Okay, Jaysen, I want to hear about your imprint and your books and how you choose them.
Yeah, my imprint is Easy Cat Press, named after my name, Easy Cat, on all my platforms. Originally, my imprint was going to be about cozy fantasy, and after one book, that sort of went out the window. So now my imprint is really focused on found family stories, specifically in the sci-fi and fantasy space. So every single book that I am publishing so far and will continue to publish, they are all wildly different, but they all share a common thread that they have a lot of they are all centered around found family in some way. So the first book that I published back in October with the initial Bindery launch was House of Frank by Kay Sinclair. And that book is a cozy adjacent witchy fantasy story about a young witch named Saika who is dealing with the loss of her sister. And so she goes to this house where it is run by this monster type creature, this beast creature named Frank. And their whole job there is that they bury the ashes of, witches and magical peoples, and those ashes then grow into magical trees. And while there, she is not quite ready to say goodbye to her sister's ashes, so she ends up working for Frank and with the people of the house. And we slowly learn about all the different members of the house and why they've all decided to live there and how they've found community with each other. So it's a very beautiful, sentimental story. My second book, which is coming out June 3rd, is called Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove. It is completely different. It is a wild, fun sci-fi adventure story that is basically the tale of a sentient intergalactic space cruiser that is being hunted by Dracula. So it is a sci-fi story mixed with a lot of classic monsters. So you might see Dracula. You'll definitely see Dracula because I just mentioned him. You might see some werewolves. You might see some mummies. There's a whole bunch of really fun classic monsters in the story, and it's a very funny book. It's got a very witty sense of humor to it. And then a little bit further in the future, but in 2026, we'll be releasing, we just recently announced Black as Diamond by U.M. Agụawike. And that is a dark, gritty, fantasy, epic fantasy story that is very much like a classic tale of, oh gosh, I can't even give a lot away because it's so far out in the future, but just know that it's very dark and gritty. It's a completely different theme and feel from the other books, but it still has these characters that, kind of find each other and go on this journey together for better or for worse. And it is also, I think a lot of these stories, I'm reading a lot of these books right now that come from the 80s when kind of the dark fantasy aesthetic was sort of birthed. And a lot of them are written by straight white men. And this book is not, and it is incredibly queer. And it's just such a breath of fresh air, but in that space. So I'm really excited for that one as well. So yeah.
Amazing. Okay, I have a question that I forgot to ask earlier. Can writers submit directly to you, or are they, when they're submitting to Bindery, are they tagging the books somehow? Because how do you discover them?
So there are two ways. Authors can have their agents submit to Bindery pretty much any time. So if they are agented, they can submit to Bindery through their agent. But we also do pitch fests. So I think it's 2 or 3 times a year. We do a pitch fest where indie authors that are unagented can submit to various imprints, and then we get those manuscripts, and then we get to go through them and search. Every imprint is different. All 3 of the books that I am publishing so far have been found through Pitch Fest. But some imprints will find all of their books through agent and submissions. It just kind of depends on the imprint. But yeah, those are the 2 ways that people can submit.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for explaining that. Okay, Mari, I want to hear about your books and what your taste is like as a tastemaker for your imprint.
Yes, so my imprint is called Mareas, and I went into this and I said, genre be damned. I don't care what genre it is. I want a book that has something to say, right? I want something that is really thematically rich, and I want something that has a distinct narrative voice. Those were my 2 things, and I just didn't know what else I wanted. So when I went in originally, that first batch of manuscripts, I read the first 25 to 50 pages of all of them. I was reading everything because I wanted a better sense of what it was exactly that I wanted. And I think right now that I'm just sort of in that lane, I want things that are thematically rich and have a distinct narrative voice. And because I read so widely and across genres, this is a reflection of me as a reader as well. My first manuscript is coming out June 3rd. It's called The Unmapping. It is literary and it is speculative. It is about a geographical natural disaster. Every day at 4 a.m. in New York City, buildings rearrange themselves. So the Empire State Building ends up on Coney Island. Power grids are snapping. There are explosions. People are lost within the city because everything is not where it's supposed to be. And so because it is speculative, it is not very concerned with how this is happening. It's asking the question, what would happen if this, how would people react? And so it's about chaos. It's about people coming together. It's about protest. It's about, there's a cult, because of course a cult would rise up if this happened, because that's how humans are. So there's just all of this exploration of what would happen if we were in this chaos, and it's a big allegory for climate change, right? And the things that we are going through right now because of climate change. So it's really weird. It's very interesting. It's got a bunch of points of view. So you're just getting all of these, like pieces of the story through these characters that you're weaving in and out from. And then my second book is called Orange Wine. It is publishing September 30th, and this is historical. It is women's fiction. It is historical. It is set in early 20th century Colombia, and it is about a woman named Inés de la Rota, who she is having to deal with the control that the Catholic Church has over her life at that time. She gets married, and turns out to be not so good, and so she's dealing with the fallout of her marriage in like a society that's not going to let her leave this man, and dealing with being a mother, but she's also an artist and she wants to express herself this way. So she's like, the whole thing is about when she turns more towards duty and when she turns more towards passion, and we see her life as she's navigating both of those things. It's written by a poet. Esperanza Hope Snyder is a poet, so it's beautiful. It's so lush. It's very poetic, and it just, it made me like ache. Bitter. It's very bittersweet, and at the end, you're like, "Am I happy or sad?" And I still don't know, but it is a worthwhile exploration.
Oh, that's amazing. And so, like, you have two books coming out this year. I had thought that
Yes.
maybe it was like one a year, because I know that Jaysen and Zoranne both have books this year, but then like also Jason's next one is in 2026. Do you choose the publishing rhythm?
So we all do one a year. That is like our baseline. And then from there, it's just a bunch of factors. And I'm sure that's the same with like, any sort of publishing cycle. It depends when we acquire it and what's coming out that, in that season from other publishers. So every imprint's going to get one a year. And then whatever else happens just kind of depends on what we find and when we find it.
That's very interesting. Okay, so our final question for you all before I let you all go is, well, I have two questions and you can choose which one you want to answer. So the first question is, do you see any trends right now in terms of what readers want? And the other option number two, is what is an underappreciated book that you think deserves more attention? So we're going to start with Zoranne.
Ooh, trends. I feel like I'm starting to see dystopian make its comeback. And I love that for us because, I feel like that Hunger Games Divergent era when I was younger was like unmatched, So I feel like we're seeing dystopian come back. And also as a trend, I feel like romantasy might be on its way out. But also that just might be like a personal preference thing, and I hope I see its way out. But it also just could be still way more on the rise. But mostly dystopian. I think that's like, we got the new Suzanne Collins book coming out next month. Ava Reid has a dystopian coming out next month. So yeah, I think we're going to see a year of dystopian. We've also like climate fiction is also being more published. Not that just because like I published a climate fiction, Mari's publishing a cli-fi, and I feel like that also kind of like lands not in like true dystopia, but like where things are headed in general. Like we're gonna be publishing books about like just where society is just getting worse and staying bad. Just as kind of like an allegory of like for like the world we're currently living in.
Oh, fascinating. All right, Mari, you're up.
I was going to say cli-fi. So I'm feeling that as well. But the other trend that I will say, and I have seen this a lot in my inbox, I feel like it is actually a trend that's building, but AI stories, I think that we're going to get a lot more of like what happens when AI becomes sentient, or what happens like the dystopian, but mixed with AI, right? The AI apocalypse or whatnot. I think that AI is on everybody's mind. And so that we're going to see that reflected in people's imaginations and their manuscripts. So I think we'll start to see slowly but surely over this year and the next one, more AI stories.
Oh, fantastic. All right. And then Jaysen, you get to wrap it all up.
I'm going to say a trend that I'm seeing in content that I think is a really awesome trend, and I hope it continues. So obviously in the book world, there's one of the easiest pieces of content that you see all the time is the book haul, right? Like I just went to the bookstore, look at all these books I got. I'm starting to see a huge rise in the library haul of like people going to the library and bringing home like, oh, these are all the books I got from my library, right? And I love that. And I hope it continues because I think obviously libraries are more important now than ever. And people, when they're doing that, they're promoting the library, they're showing what you can get at the library. They're not over consuming like crazy. I mean, none of us have any space. So why not borrow books that you can then like return and they don't take up space? And I'm seeing it more, and especially in like the last like 3 or 4 months, I've just seen more and more like bigger creators doing these library hauls. And I love it. And I hope it continues because I just think it is so needed right at this moment, especially. And I think it's awesome.
I think that's wonderful as an author. Well, my mother-in-law is a librarian, so I love libraries. And I think something that readers don't realize is that authors do get compensated for library copies. So like readers never have to feel guilty about going to the library and checking out a book. They pay for each of our hardcovers or paperbacks. And then the ebooks that the libraries have, they license from us. And so we're getting royalties from them. And if there's a huge demand, like if you really want a book and your library doesn't have enough copies, for example, of the ebook, you can request and then they might go and get extra copies because each quote unquote copy of an ebook has like a certain number of like reads or like checkouts that they can have. And then authors get compensated for that. And then when they run out, they can just like re-up that license or they can get extra, copies of those ebooks. So like, absolutely. I love this library haul trend. I think that's kind of it for how much time we have, but thank you so much for being here. This has been really insightful, super fun. I'm going to include in the episode notes all of the links to your favorite channels where readers can find you. But thank you so much for this really great conversation about where we are today in the book creation space.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.